Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something that's, well, it's really moving beyond just talk. It's starting to reshape finance.
Definitely. We're talking about tokenizing real-world assets, things like property, credit, maybe even commodities.
Yeah, putting them on the blockchain. And the big names, the institutions, they're signaling this is where things are headed.
That's right.
Yeah.
You look at BlackRock, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, the signals are there. RWA tokenization is shifting from theory to actual deployment.
Okay, so let's dive in. And for this, we're looking at some really interesting material provided by David Wegner. He's truly an expert in this RWA space.
Yeah, absolutely is.
And his analysis kicks off with this pretty sharp observation. A lot of the excitement you hear is about the assets themselves, tokenizing this building or that shipment. Mm-hmm. But history kind of tells a different story, doesn't it? The big wins weren't always in the gold itself, but...
The shovels. That's the analogy the source uses.
It is.
Think Gold Rush, who made the consistent money. Often the folks selling the picks, the shovels, the gear.
Right.
Or early crypto. Yeah, Bitcoin was huge. But think about the underlying platforms.
Yeah.
Ethereum, Solana, BNB. That infrastructure layer created immense value.
So the argument here, the thesis from this source, is that the... let's call it the smart money now, is looking at the protocols, the actual plumbing that makes RWA tokenization work.
Yeah, the infrastructure.
And that leads us right to a specific token the analysis focuses on, SQRS. It's presented as exactly that, the infrastructure fuel for RWAs, but on its own dedicated network.
And that perspective is interesting, isn't it? Positioning yourself at that fundamental layer, the bedrock.
Yeah.
That could be a totally different kind of opportunity compared to just buying, say, a fraction of one tokenized property.
And the analysis really pushes on why now might be the time to pay attention. There's a case made for this specific token, SQRS, and its network, the RWX Blockchain. Mm-hmm. You'll want to stick with us here because the way they describe the potential demand and price dynamics, it involves this mix of real utility and a pretty extreme deflationary model.
It's quite a combination. But let's ground ourselves first.
Yeah.
The source confirms, RWA tokenization is happening. Big finance is involved. That's the backdrop.
It's definitely moved into the mainstream strategy talks. Okay, so connecting back to that infrastructure idea.
Right. The argument is the opportunity is underneath the individual assets. It's about enabling the whole market.
Building the highway, not just buying one car that drives on it.
Exactly that analogy.
Okay, so let's properly introduce SQRS and the RWX blockchain based on what the source tells us. What are they, fundamentally?
So according to this analysis, SQRS is the native token, the one you use for transactions on the RWX blockchain.
Got it.
And the RWX blockchain itself, it's described as peer-to-peer infrastructure, specifically designed for these on-chain real-world assets.
And SQRS acts as the fuel, then?
Precisely. The source is clear. Looking forward, every smart contract interaction, every trade, every time ownership changes hands on the RWX network, it's going to use SQRS.
Oh, okay.
It's positioned as that core utility token. Think of it like gas on Ethereum or maybe like Ether itself, but specifically for RWA stuff on this chain.
So its use is baked right into how the network operates, which ties directly to the point about demand and utility the source makes, right?
Absolutely. The source really stresses this. SQRS is aiming for real demand that comes from using the protocol from network activity, not just, hype or speculation.
Makes sense. So how does that utility actually create demand? What's the mechanism?
The analysis lays it out pretty clearly. As more RWAs get tokenized and actually start trading or being managed on the RWX network, and as more users globally start interacting with these tokenized assets on this network, well, the need to use SQRS for all those actions just grows.
Because you can't do those things without it.
Exactly. The source argues the demand becomes functionally necessary, almost inevitable if the network gets adopted, because it's just how the system is built. It's the stuff that makes the engine run.
Got it. So demand isn't just hoped for, it's required by the protocol itself if people want to use it. Now, timing. The source mentioned a specific price.
Yeah, in noted the price at the time of the analysis was around BL 118.
And is there a plan for the price before it goes fully public?
The source indicated a plan for gradual increases, aiming for Blue 4045 rounds before the TGE. That's the token generation event, basically the main public launch or listing.
Right, the TGE. And after that point?
Well, the analysis expects demand to increase even more, because now you'd have investors, asset owners, maybe other platforms wanting to build on RWX. And they'll need to get SQRS to actually use the infrastructure to participate. It's not just holding, it's needing it to interact.
Okay, this leads to another really interesting piece highlighted in the source. this hyper-deflationary idea.
Yeah, this is a major mechanism they detail. SQRS is designed intentionally with a supply model that's meant to be hyper-deflationary.
And they put a number on that. How much reduction?
A pretty startling figure, actually. The plan outlined is to burn, meaning permanently remove from circulation, 19 out of every 20 SQRS tokens over the next decade.
Wow, 19 out of 20. That's significant.
They're very aggressive.
So, okay, let's picture this. You potentially have adoption growing, transaction volume increasing, so the need for the token is going up.
The utility demand rises.
While the actual available supply of that token is being drastically cut.
Yeah, and the source basically asks that classic economics question. What tends to happen when demand climbs and supply plummets?
Upward pressure on price. That's the theory.
Right. The source argues that this specific combo, real-world utility driving demand, meeting this rapidly shrinking supply, that's where the potential for what they call exponential upside could come from. And they draw parallels, suggesting it's maybe like getting in early on something like Ethereum back in, say, 2015 or BNB before Binance really exploded in 2017.
Being there before the big waves of mainstream and institutional money potentially arrive.
That's the idea. Being positioned in the protocol itself.
So, just to be crystal clear, the analysis frames this not as buying a piece of tokenized property or something.
No, definitely not. The source emphasizes you're backing the underlying rails, the protocol layer itself, the foundation that potentially hosts lots of different tokenized assets and apps.
And the source actually lists specific features of this RWX infrastructure that you're backing, in their view, by holding SQRS.
It does. It highlights several things aimed at making it suitable for, serious RWA use, especially institutions. First, it's presented as compliant infrastructure.
Okay.
Specifically mentioning it has BaFin confirmation and is MiCA exempt.
Right, let's pause there. BaFin, that's the German financial regulator, a big deal. And MiCA is the EU's big crypto regulation framework. Why is that status, that BaFin confirmation and MiCA exemption, so important here?
Oh, it's absolutely critical for institutions. They live and breathe regulation. Knowing that a major regulator like BaFin has looked at it or confirmed something about it, and understanding how it fits or doesn't fit under broad rules like MiCA, that provides a level of legal clarity. It's like a green light, or at least a yellow light, that regulated firms need before they can seriously engage with a new network. It reduces the risk for them.
That makes total sense. Compliance is table stakes for the big players. What else does the source highlight about the infrastructure?
It mentions a peer-to-peer model.
Okay.
The idea there is cutting out middlemen, potentially lowering costs and speeding things up.
Okay.
It also points to patent-protected smart contracts that have asset logic embedded in them.
Meaning the specific rules for how an asset behaves, like loan interest or dividend payouts, are built right into the code and legally protected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Making it more reliable and predictable for financial use cases.
Yeah.
And finally, the source describes it as an interoperable blockchain, built to scale up as RWA tokenization hopefully grows worldwide.
Built for the kind of volumes real-world assets might involve.
That seems to be the design goal, yes.
Okay, so these features really do sound tailored for institutional-level RWAs, and the source really hammers home this idea of getting in early on this infrastructure.
Yeah, the argument is basically that this stage, the current stage, is where conviction can potentially lead to outsized returns.
How so?
Because, the thinking goes, early token holders benefit from the protocol's growth and utility before potentially huge volumes from institutional capital come in and become the main driver of demand and maybe price.
Right. So let's try and bring this all together from the source material we've looked at.
Yeah.
RWA tokenization, it's happening. Big finance is looking at it seriously.
Sure.
The thesis presented here says a key opportunity might not be in the individual assets, but in the underlying tech, the protocols, using SQRS on the RWX blockchain as the example.
And the potential driver for value, according to this analysis, is that mix. Real utility creating demand.
Meeting that aggressive, hyper-deflationary supply burn.
That's the core mechanism described.
So the source really leaves you with a pretty stark choice to think about. From this perspective, it's potentially about getting involved with infrastructure like this now.
In these earlier phases, at maybe lower prices.
Or waiting until it's perhaps fully mainstream, validated, tons of volume, but then potentially buying in at a much, much higher price point. Maybe multiples higher, as the source implies.
It does make you consider where the real value gets built in these new financial systems. Is it just the assets on top, or is it also these foundational layers that enable everything?
A really fascinating perspective. And again, this analysis comes from David Wagner, who provided the material and, as we said, is a genuine expert in the RWA space.
Definitely someone whose insights are worth paying attention to in this field.
So, if you found this deep dive interesting and you want to hear more directly from the source, you should absolutely check out David Wagner's YouTube channel. We'll put a link in the description for you.
Yeah, good idea.
And if you are considering that choice the source presents and want to explore SQRS itself, there's also a link in the description that can point you towards where you might potentially acquire it.
And, for that reason alone, if you are thinking about it, subscribing to David Wagner's channel and hitting the notification bell makes a lot of sense.
Oh, yeah. Why is that?
Because he's apparently doing an upcoming video explaining step-by-step how to actually buy SQRS, which, let's face it, can be tricky sometimes in crypto, so a guide would be super useful if you're looking into the practicalities.
A step-by-step guide is always helpful. Okay, lots to think about there. Consider that choice the source lays out based on everything we've discussed today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.